So I think we're just going to start at the Mishnah again on the bottom of Mem Beis Amud Aleph. I'll just go through that quickly because the Gemara is talking about that tonight. So the Mishnah said on Mem Beis Amud Aleph, Berachos yayin shelifnei hamazon patas yayin shelachar hamazon. That if someone made a bracha on the wine that used to drink before the meal, and again remember they would have generally 3 times that they would be drinking wine. They would drink wine before the meal started, as kind of like to eat with an appetizer. Then they would drink a cup of wine during the meal, and that would be more to just help in the digestion. It would soak up the food so they'd be able to eat more. And then they would have another wine at the end of the meal, and that was also, they would have that with dessert. That was also kind of just like a sweetener to wet the palate after they were done. So Berachos yayin shelifnei hamazon patas yayin shelachar hamazon. If he makes a bracha on the wine before the meal started, then he patters the wine that he's going to drink after that he's eating that third cup of wine that he'd be drinking. If he made a bracha on the appetizer that was done before the meal, so again he patters the food that they'd be eating during the meal. It will cover that as well. If he made a bracha on the bread, it's going to exempt him from having to make a bracha on the other foods, on the other foods that they'd be eating. But if he made a bracha on the appetizer type food, that's not going to exempt him from having to make a bracha on the motzi on the bread. That it also doesn't count for mais kedera, which is a type of porridge, which the Gemara is going to discuss that tonight. What is Beis Shammai talking about? If they were sitting together, each person would make a bracha by himself when he was going to be drinking. But if they were reclining, then one person would make a bracha for everybody. Turning to Mem Beis Amud Beis. If they brought them wine during the meal, every person would make the bracha for himself. If they brought the wine at the end of the meal, and again, mazon here means the meal, it doesn't mean benching. So one person would make a bracha for all of them. And the same person that was making the bracha for everybody on that cup of wine that was done at the end of the meal, he would also make the bracha on the mugmar, which was the spices or the basamim that they would bring, that they would make a bracha on during the meal. Even though they didn't bring it until after the meal was over, but still this one person would make the bracha on the basamim for everybody, and he would be yotzi then. Okay, so we did that last night. Now we're going to start the Gemara. That which we said, that if someone drinks a cup of wine before the meal starts, it's going to exempt him from having to make a bracha after for what he's drinking during the meal. At the end of the meal, that's only talking about on Shabbos and Yom Tif. Why? Because a person on Shabbos and Yom Tif, they establish a meal. Meaning they drink more on a Shabbos and Yom Tif meal than they do during the week. But on other days of the week, the person has to make a bracha on each and every cup of wine that he's going to be drinking, because generally, unless someone has a problem, you're not drinking many cups of wine during the week, at your meals. You're having a cup of wine, maybe, you'll have 1 cup of wine. But at a Shabbos and Yom Tov meal, which is longer and it's more elaborate, so then a person will be drinking more wine. So therefore, during the week, you would have to make a bracha on each cup that you're drinking. And on Shabbos and Yom Tov, you would be able to make 1 bracha, and that's going to cover all of them. So again, if you're going out to, let's say it's a special occasion and you're going out to eat, and if it all goes by what your das is. This is really talking about what's your intent when you're making the bracha. So if your and the Gemara is actually going to show a case like that. But if your intent when you're sitting down at the meal is that I'm planning on drinking a lot of wine right now, then you only make 1 bracha at the start and that's it. But the Gemara is defining that what is the normal course, that when people are eating and drinking, what do they normally do? At a regular Shabbos and Yom Tov meal, people will have multiple cups of wine. But during the week, if someone's sitting down, he's sitting at supper, and he wants to have a glass of wine with his supper, so then it helps the macaroni and cheese go down better. So then, he's gonna, generally you only have 1 cup of wine. You're not going to be drinking multiple cups. But you're right. If he was out at a restaurant and they're bringing a bottle to the table or something, and you're going to be drinking many cups, you would only make 1 bracha on it. Itmarnami, so we're going to bring a proof to this. That's going to show that. Amar Rabba Bar Mari, Amar Rabbi Yeshua, Ben Levi, Lo Shana Ol B'Shabbos of Yom Tov, that it's only on Shabbos and Yom Tif. Again, that we said that you make 1 bracha is going to cover all of the cups. And the Gemara also throws in that in those days where people would go to the bathhouses or that they would give blood, so again, the custom was that after they would drink, after they go to the bathhouse, and they would have a good schwitz, so they would reinvigorate themselves by having a nice cup of wine, or after they gave blood, they would also, now they give out orange juice, but in those days they would have they would have a cup of wine. So in those situations where a person knows that he's going to be drinking, then he would only make one bracha. Because that's a time, those times, Shabbos, Yom Tif, when he's leaving the bathhouse, when he's giving blood, so those are the times that a person normally would establish a meal around wine. But the rest of the days, a regular day of the year, the person makes a bracha on each and every bracha that he's drinking. Rabbi Bar Mari, so Rabbi Bar Mari went on a weekday, he went to Rava for a meal, and he saw that Rava made a bracha on the wine that was served before the meal. And then he also made another bracha on the wine that was served at the end of the meal. So Amarle, so Rabbi Bar Mari said to Rava, Yasher, you did that's a great job, exactly what you're supposed to be doing. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, the same thing, that you did exactly what you're supposed to do. It was a weekday meal, so therefore he made a bracha each time that he was drinking wine, and he says that you did the right thing that you're supposed to be doing. Rabbi Yitzchak, and another story similar to this, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, Iklo lebei Abai b'Yom Tif. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef went to Abai's house, and this was on Yom Tif now. So remember, on Yom Tif normally, you make one bracha, and that's going to exempt you from having to make the rest of a bracha again on any additional cups of wine that you're drinking. So Chazia debarich akol kas v'kas, and he saw that Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef saw that Abai was making a bracha on each and every cup of wine that he was drinking. So he said to him, Amar Le, Lo Savar Lamar, Lahad Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Don't you hold like Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said that on Shabbos and Yom Tif, when you make a bracha at the beginning, you're going to exempt yourself from having to make a bracha again if you're drinking wine later on during the meal. So he answered him, Amar Le, Nimlachana. And this is what we were talking about before. He says, no, I didn't have my mind in it. When I drink a wine, I normally drink one cup of wine. I don't care if it's Shabbos, Yom Tif, whenever it is, I only drink one cup of wine. So when he was having another cup of wine, even though it was Yom Tif, but because when he made that first bracha, his intent was to have one cup and that's it, therefore he makes a bracha again when he has another cup of wine later on during the meal. They asked the question, if they brought wine to the people that were all eating together, they brought wine to them during the meal, what's the halacha as far as does it exempt them from having to make a bracha now? Again, they brought wine during the meal, and that wine is done for more of a digestive type purpose. Okay, Rashi explains. He says, again, he goes through this whole thing about how the wines were drank for different purposes. Drunk. They would drink the wine for different purposes. So they asked him, what happens if they brought this wine during the meal? We're on Membeis and Mabeis. Okay. So he said, what's the halach with that? So im tim salomar berachal yain shlifnei hamazon podes yain shalach hamazon. When do we say that if you made a bracha, like in the Mishnah said, that if you make a bracha before the meal starts with the appetizer, that you're going to exempt that third cup of wine, that dessert type wine that they would have, you're going to exempt it. Why does that exempt it? Bishum, because both those cups of wine, you're drinking them so that you can get the enjoyment of what the wine's bringing. It's whetting the appetite, it's getting you ready for the eating, or when the meal's over, again, you want to have that sweet taste of the wine. You're just literally just drinking the wine for the enjoyment. But over here, where they brought the first cup of wine, they didn't have a pre-game meal, a pre-game cup of wine. They just had one cup of wine that they brought them that was during the meal. And we said that the wine that's brought during the meal is done to absorb the food that's inside to help with the digestive process. But you're not drinking it for the benefit because you enjoy drinking the wine. So maybe when the first cup you're drinking because you want to have the help with the digestion, maybe that's not going to allow you to exempt you from making a bracha on the second cup of wine that you're drinking, which you're doing because you want to have it for just the pleasure of the wine. Dilma lotion, or maybe it doesn't make a difference. Maybe it could be that, and this is a question. Maybe we say that that really doesn't make a difference. That if you make one bracha on the wine, even though the first one is for digestion and the second one is because you enjoy the pleasure of the wine, it won't make a difference, and you would be able to just make one bracha. So a different answer is not what it is. Rav Amar Poter. Rav says that you don't have to make another bracha. Rav Kahana Amar Eina Poter. Rav Kahana says you do have to make another bracha. Rav Nachman Amar Poter. Rav Nachman says that you don't have to. That you don't have to. Rav Sheshes Amar Eina Poter. You don't have to. I'm sorry, you do have to. Rav Huna, Rav Yehuda, V'chal Tamid Rav Amri Ein Poter. They all say that it does not exempt you, and therefore you would have to make another bracha. That there is a difference between the wine that you're drinking for to help with the digestion versus the wine that you're drinking for enjoyment. And he says you would have to make separate bari priyagafens on those wines. So the Gemara asks now, Eisri Rav Rav Nachman. We said in the Mishnah that if they brought them wine in middle of the meal, so each and every person is supposed to make a bracha for himself. But if they brought it after the meal was over, one person makes a bracha for all of them. So the question's asked, you see that there's a difference now between the first cup, right? Each one makes for himself, and the cup that's at the end, where one person does for all of them. So you see that the bracha that you're making on the wine during the meal does not cover the wine that you did at the end. So Amalei said to him, Hachi Kamar, Im lo balahem yaim b'soch hamazon el la'achar mazon echem v'reich l'kulam. You're reading it wrong. You thought that it's saying that if they brought them one cup of wine during the middle of the meal, and each person makes a bracha for himself, but then later on they have to do it themselves. That's not what the situation was. Situation was that they only brought them one cup of wine, and that was brought at the end of the meal. So in that situation, one person is going to be able to make the bracha, and he's going to cover for everybody. Okay, next part of the Mishnah said, Berach al pas pater as parperes al parperes al pater as pas beishamei omrim aflo mais gedera. So the Gemara is going to try to understand now, what does it mean? We said that if someone makes a bracha on the bread, so then he doesn't have to make a bracha then on the ancillary foods that are being eaten in addition to it. But again, if you make a bracha on bread at the beginning and they bring out a roast in the middle of the meal, you don't have to make a bracha on it. And then Beishamai said this thing, aflo mais gedera, also for porridge. So the Gemara doesn't understand what was Beishamai saying. Were they saying you do have to, you don't have to, it exempts you, it doesn't exempt you? So that's the Gemara is going to ask that question. How you buy lahu? Beishamai aresha pligi o dilma aseifa pligi. Is Beishamai arguing on the first half, where it's talking about for the where you made a bracha on the bread and it's going to pot through the parperes? Actually, the Gemara is going to explain out what it is. The Kamar Tanakama, the Mishnah said, Berach al pas pater as parperes, that if you make a bracha on bread, then you're exempted from having to, again, let's call it meat. Then you don't have to make a bracha on this parperes. You don't have to make a bracha on the roast that they bring during the meal. The chol shekei mais kedera, and the Tanakama holds, and for sure this porridge, which is again usually is like a mazonos type of food, for sure you're not going to have to make a bracha on that because that's part of the meal. And the Beishamai came along and argued, and they said, "Lomi boy parperes lo patra lu pas." Forget the fact that the parperes, the Beishamai is going to hold that this roast that you're bringing during the meal is not going to be exempted from the fact that you made a bracha on the motzi. Elafilu mais kedera nami lo patra, but it's not even going to exempt you from having to make a bracha on the porridge, which is again it's a more substantive type of food. It has more because it has more grains in it. Oh, Dilma Seifa Pligir. Maybe Beis Shammai is arguing on the second half of the Mishnah. The Tani, we learned in the Mishnah, Berach al parperes lo pater as pas. If you made a bracha on this ancillary dish, this again, let's say on the roast, you still have to make a bracha on the bread. So, and he's saying pasu de lo pater, avomais k'der pater, and the Mishnah is saying that it's only bread that you didn't exempt, but you do exempt other foods, like let's say this porridge. Also, Beishamai l'meimer, and then Beishamai comes along and says, "Vafilu mais k'der nami lo pater." No, that even mais k'der, you're also not going to be pater. You're going to have to make a bracha on that also. The Gemara is trying to understand which way is Beishamai going, and the Gemara says, "Teiku." We're not. The Gemara was not. The Gemara was not sure what Beishamai was trying to say in the Mishnah. Okay, next part of the Mishnah said, "Hayoshvin kol echad v'echad." If they were sitting together, then each person would make the bracha for himself. But if they were reclining, then one person can make for all of them. So again, remember, back in those days, in the days of yore, when people would eat meals, they would eat like we would do at the Seder. That they would recline when they're eating, and that would give them more of a group type setting. Okay, if each person's sitting by himself, then it's like, I'm here, you're there, and each one's in his own little world. But if they're reclining, then that would be more of a companionship type of thing that was going on, like Lord of the Rings. They're all together, and they'd be able to, it's like one thing that they're doing together, so one person can make a bracha for all of them. So Gemara says, Hesebu, it only says that if they reclined, then one person can make a bracha for all of them. Lo Hesebu lo, but if they were not reclining, then each person, if they were just sitting together, even though they're eating together, but if they're just sitting and they're not reclining, then each person has to make his own bracha. One person cannot make it for everyone else. Remenu, so I'm going to ask you a contradiction. If you had 10 people that were traveling together on the road, even though they're all eating from one loaf of bread, let's say that they had one giant loaf of bread, and they would pass it around, and each one would rip off a piece of the bread to eat it. Each person has to make the bracha for himself. But let's say they sat down to eat. Okay, the key word here is yashvu. Even though they each had their own loaf of bread, okay, they weren't sharing one loaf of bread, but they each had their own loaf of bread. One person would make the bracha for all of them. So, what the Gemara is going to ask now, Tani, Yashvu afal pishalo isebu. It says that they sat down. It doesn't say that they were reclining, and still we say that they're able to have one per. Even though they're each eating their own loaf of bread and they're sitting, each person can make his own bracha. Even though they're sitting down together and they're not reclining, one person can make the bracha for all of them. So the Gemara is trying to understand it's a contradiction. The Gemara answers, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. They made up. They said, let's go sit down together and let's go to eat a meal together. So again, it's like what we were saying before. It all depends on what the intent is. If the intent is like the Gemara is saying that when they're reclining, that's like automatic intent. That means that they're planning on eating a meal together. But if they're all traveling together and then they all say, hey, let's all stop right here and eat together, that's the equivalent of reclining. So therefore, one person can make a bracha for the whole group. Okay, now a story related to this. Gemara says, Kinach Nashri de Rav, when Rav died, Azul Talmida Basre, so his Talmidim were going with him. He wasn't buried in the city where he died, but he was being buried in another city. So his Talmidim were going with him to where he was being buried. Kiadri, when they were returning from the burial, Amri Nezel V'nechol Lachma Anahar Danak. Let's go and eat at this place by the riverbank of Danak, which was the name of the river. Basra de Karchi, Yasvi Kami Bailu. So after they had eaten the bread, so they sat down and they asked a question. Hey, Sebu Dafka Tanan, Aval Yashvu Lo, is it only if they recline together that we say that then one person can make a bracha for everyone? Aval Yashvu Lo, but if they're sitting, then one person cannot. Oh, Dilma, Kivan de Amri, Nezel V'nechol, Rifta, Beduchta Planyasa, maybe because since we said specifically, let's stop here and let's eat now, so maybe Ki Hasebu Dami, that's considered as if we were reclining, and therefore one person could make the bracha for all of us. And the Gemara says, Lo Havi B'dayu, they didn't know what the answer was. They weren't sure what the answer to that question was. So come Ravada Barava. So Ravada Barava got up, who was one of the Talmidim of Rav. He stood up, turning now to Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, and it says, Adar Kare Lachore V'Kare Kriya Achrina. He had already torn Kriya when Rav died, and he sat right now at this moment, and he tore Kriya again. He tore Kriya again. And he said to them, Amar, he said, Nach Nashi de Rav, Ubirchas Mezona Lo Gamrinam. Our Rebbe Rav died, and we don't even know the halachos of Birchas Hamazon, meaning it hit them that the Rebbe was dead, because up until now, if they had a question, if that was considered to be like one person can make the bracha for all of them, if they didn't say recline, but they said let's just stop here and eat, and they realized that the Rebbe was dead. So again, even though they had just finished burying him, they tore Kriya again, and they started lamenting that they didn't have someone that could help them to answer the questions. Until there was an old man that was there, Ramaluhu Masnis and Abraisa, and he pointed out that there was a contradiction that we mentioned before between what we just did a few lines ago, saying that one person was able to do it for all of them, even though all they said was let's sit here, let's stop here to eat, and they didn't recline. Then he says, Kim the army, Nezel v'nechol lachma v'duch plankas sebudami, that once they would make up that they're going to eat. If they say, even though they're not reclining, if they just said that we're going to sit together and we're going to eat, that's considered that they are together, and one person is able to make the bracha for all of them. Okay, we'll stop here at the 2 dots. Tomorrow night, same time, 8 o'clock.